Ukraine says more than 100 civilians were evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol on Sunday. The plant is the last part of the city not occupied by Russian forces. Hundreds more people are still trapped there, along with around 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers. Evacuations were carried in coordination with the United Nations and Red Cross after talks to open a humanitarian corridor.
Rescued from the rubble, the civilian survivors of the Azovstal steel plant climb from the darkness of bunkers under the cover of a two-day ceasefire. Video released by the Azov regiment show the final steps of an almost unbearable wait for help.
We've been here for 2 months.
Her baby turned 6 months old a day earlier, a young life spent under siege. These children tell how they almost ran out of food.
The children wanted to eat all the time. You know, adults can endure.
The evacuations were the result of tireless diplomacy, praised by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
After many weeks of negotiations, after many attempts, different meetings, people, calls, countries, proposals, finally, there was not a single day when we did not try to find a solution that would save our people.
Russia's military also released its video of people being transported from Azovstal and taken to camps. It says those wishing to be evacuated to Ukrainian-held territory will be passed over to the United Nations and Red Cross. The survivors bear stories of existing in squalid conditions in oxygen-deprived bunkers.
I can't believe it. 2 months of darkness. When we were in the bus, I told my husband, we won't have to use a flashlight to go to the toilet in a bag and bin. We didn't see any sunlight. We were scared.
The UN and Red Cross hope to help more civilians out of Mariupol. Hundreds still remain in Azovstal, waiting for a similar escape.
DW correspondent Fanny Fashar is standing by for us in Kyiv. Fanny, it's good to see you. Around 100 civilians were able to leave that Azovstal on Sunday. What are the plans to get the rest of them out?
Definitely there's a call on making sure more and more people get out. In fact, behind me you see this banner that says in Ukrainian, "Deblokujte Mariupol," which translates in English to "deblock Mariupol." Now, that city is unlikely to be liberated at this point because it's controlled by Russia for the most part, except for that steel plant where hundreds of people remain trapped. But those 100 civilians that could leave the steel plant yesterday, and really we are speaking about children who see sunlight again for the first time in weeks, who actually get some fresh water and basic things. More people would like to enjoy this freedom again, but will they? That's the question. Now, the City Council of Mariupol said that, in fact, a bigger evacuation is due to start this morning, but it was already delayed from yesterday. Also, reports that shelling resumed after this first group of people left the steel plant. As a result, really the question is, will this evacuation continue Mariupol? How many more people are going to leave? Certainly, the people who are inside would like to get out, not only civilians, but also wounded soldiers. And let's not forget, unfortunately, according to information inside, there are also dead bodies that are decomposing. It's really harrowing just to imagine, let alone experience, what people are going through inside the steel plant as we are speaking.
Well, you mentioned them there, those soldiers. What's the plan to evacuate them? Are they part of this plan, Fanny?
The deputy commander of the Azov regiment made clear that they want everyone out there, both civilians and soldiers. But at the same time, this deputy commander also made clear, had they not been inside to defend the steel plant, then the entire front line, actually, of Russia would be even further up towards the north. So he's basically also justifying in a way already that it was very important, and it is important, to defend the steel plant, to make sure to prevent that Russia advances advances even further, which is obviously stands in the line of what the Russian plan is to advance, especially in the Donbas region, but also in the southern part of Ukraine. Whether more people are going to get out, we are not only speaking about 1,000 civilians inside, that's the estimate, but about 2,000 soldiers who are also inside or underneath this steel plant. You have to imagine this is like a system of various bunkers, partly shelled, partly with mines. It's very difficult to get people out, and the next hours just have to see and prove whether that's going to be possible and a ceasefire can be maintained to help people out from the steel plant in Mariupol.
Well, Fanny, thanks very much for that update. DW correspondent Fanny Fasher in Kyiv. Well, for more, I'm joined by Frank Ledwidge. He's a senior lecturer in strategy and law at the University of Portsmouth and a former military intelligence officer. Frank, thanks very much for speaking to us this morning. So some 100 civilians have been evacuated. That does give some hope. Tell us, why haven't Russian troops been able to take that steel plant, do you think?
First of all, it's extremely difficult to take any built-up area. You need the rules say essentially you need a 5-to-1 preponderance of forces in built-up areas. And something like the steel plant is absolutely vicious for attackers. This reminds historians, I think almost anyone who knows anything about military history, very much of the tractor factory at Stalingrad, which the Russians held on to. It's iconic in Russian military history. They held on to it for 3 months, and it's very possible it'll happen here. But also, Russian difficulties compounded by the fact that during the Cold War, the Azovstal complex was treated as one of the sort of cores as in the centres of the nuclear defence system. So it's filled with underground bunkers. It'd be really difficult to clear those out. So it's a really difficult nut to crack for Russians.
Well, elsewhere, the Russian troops have made minor advances, particularly in the Donbass. But on the other hand, Ukrainian soldiers have managed to push back in some areas, particularly taking back some key villages in the Kharkiv region. And these front lines seem to be barely moving. Are we in the midst of a war of attrition?
Very much so. This is a grinding war of artillery, of small movements, of manoeuvre warfare. And the Ukrainians are far better than the Russians. Interestingly, in the north there, you mentioned Kharkiv. The problem for the Russians there is the Ukrainians are getting quite close to being able to shell some of the Russian supply routes to the south. So some analysts are looking at this and saying, well, this may result in the Russians actually withdrawing forces from the Donbass area north to try and defend that. But we'll see that. What's happening in the south, however, is very interesting. Reports indicate that yesterday the Russian chief of the General Staff, General Gerasimov, was almost caught in an artillery strike which killed dozens of officers. And he was there, evidently, to see what's holding all this up. And, of course, what's holding it up is the endemic ramshackle nature of the Russian army. It's simply not up to modern standards, but that's a separate issue. They're making very slow progress, Rebecca.
All right, Frank. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Frank Ledwidge, former military intelligence officer, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Well, more than 5 million Ukrainians have now fled their country since the war began, according to the United Nations. The vast majority of them are women and children. In the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, the exodus means some schools are virtually empty. One of them is using its empty classrooms to provide shelter to refugees from other parts of the country.
Since the war started, Ivan Lazensko's Ukrainian-German school in Lviv has drastically changed. Although we meet him on a weekday, there is no child in sight.
Of course, the school has changed a lot, because 43% of the children now live abroad. But they still actively take part in remote learning classes.
The school's premises didn't remain empty for long. With the help of parents and volunteers, Ivan decided to host internally displaced people from the regions worst affected by the war. So far, almost 200 people have stayed here, mostly men, as they are not allowed to leave the country. Volodymyr arrived to the school at the end of March. He fled from Demyidiv, near Kiev, carrying only a few belongings and this paper with him, where he wrote down that after a stroke he couldn't talk very fast and needed immediate evacuation.
We just walked. There was a 50-50 chance to end up dead or alive. We walked through. We walked past the dam, on the road to the bridge, which was blown up by our army. I passed the first Russian checkpoint without problems. But on the second I was stopped and they asked me, "What do you have here?" When I said, "My cell phone," it was taken away.
Volodymyr sleeps in what used to be the school's main hall, now transformed into a dormitory. There, we also meet Alexandre, who hopes to join the Ukrainian armed forces.
I came alone. My family stayed near Kharkiv. We live in the northern part, closer to Russia, and it's been bombed every day since the beginning of the war. Nearly everyone in the neighborhood left town. I still have to pass a medical check to join the army, and after that, I don't know. I don't have a military specialty, so I'll probably have to train for a few months.
In what used to be classrooms, we meet Mikhailo and his son-in-law Denis from Bucha. Their wives now live in Germany. They have lost all of their possessions and only brought Mickey, the family dog. On the evening of February 28th, Russian soldiers knocked on Denis' door.
Russian troops forcibly removed me from my flat. They came with rifles. They searched me, broke my mobile phones and stole my laptops. They brought me to the nearby church and told me not to come outside until sunrise. They set up their military position and their artillery. There's only me and 2 other men. In the morning, we left and settled here.
In his school, Ivan provides some relief to fellow Ukrainians who have lost everything. But those displaced people, and especially men, are left in limbo here in Lviv, not knowing if and when they will be able to return home.
In Ukraine, war has separated families across the country. Some have fled war-torn areas, leaving others behind to fight. DW has been speaking to a woman in Western Ukraine who received a very special video message from her boyfriend fighting on the front line.
I can rely on you in difficult times. I love you very much. I don't have a wedding ring for you right now, but I do have a ring on this grenade. I would love you to be my wife. Please marry me.
Anastasia Blushchuk was hoping for a sign of life from her boyfriend when she looked at her phone 3 weeks ago. Then she saw the video that would change her life forever.
I wanted to say yes instantly. I tried to text him or call, but I couldn't get through. Then he finally called back and I said, "How could I refuse you, especially with a grenade in your hand?"
After the war began, Anastasia fled to the city of Lviv. Her boyfriend went to fight in the Donbass region, one of the most dangerous war zones. Sometimes he sends her little videos and of the photo he always carries in his first aid bag. But Anastasia hasn't heard from him for days.
There are moments when I can't take it anymore and I start crying. I try to make sure no one sees me. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. All I know is if something happens to him, oh God.
According to martial law, Ukrainians can even get married remotely. But in Anastasia's case, that's not an option.
At the moment, he is in a very difficult place. There's no internet, no pens, not even paper. He can't even wash himself properly.
Anastasia says at some point the war will end. Then they will get married properly, and she will no longer have to walk alone.